All right, let's get right into it. If you've ever started a fitness journey, you've definitely asked yourself this question. How long is this actually going to take? Well, today we're going to cut through all that noise and get down to the real, unfiltered timeline for fat loss.
So let's say you're starting out with a little bit of a higher body fat percentage, maybe 20% or more. And your goal is simple, right? You want to see your abs. To do that, you've got to get down to around 12% body fat. So of course, the number one question on your mind is probably the same one everyone asks. How long is this really going to take?
And look, the math seems pretty simple. You can crunch the numbers, you can calculate the calories, and get this really neat answer on paper. But as we're about to find out, if getting lean was as easy as just doing some basic math, well, a lot more people would have six-packs, right? The actual journey is never, ever a straight line.
Okay, to really show you what this looks like in the real world, let's follow the story of a guy we'll call Joe. Honestly, his story is the perfect example of what really happens when you try to go from, say, 24% body fat all the way down to 12%, especially if it's your first time doing it.
So here's the deal with Joe. He's 39, works a pretty sedentary desk job as a developer. He's 5'10", weighs about 200 pounds, and he guesses his body fat is somewhere around 24%. His goal is ambitious, but it's super clear. He wants visible abs by his 40th birthday, and that's just 6 months away. So he's motivated, he's got a deadline, he is ready to go.
So Joe does what most of us would do. He starts with the simple math. First, he figures out his lean mass. That's, everything in your body that isn't fat. Muscle, bones, organs, the whole deal. From there, he calculates that to hit his 12% body fat goal, his target weight should be around 173 pounds. Okay, so that means he needs to lose 27 pounds. And at a pretty standard rate of 1 pound per week, well, the math says it should take 27 weeks. It fits perfectly into his 6-month deadline. On paper, at least.
And this, right here, is the heart of the whole thing. The plan on paper, it's this beautiful, clean, straight line going down. But the real journey, oh man, the real journey is a messy path of plateaus, real-life events that just knock you completely off track, and all these mental hurdles that, a calculator just can't account for.
All right, so let's dive into phase 1 of Joe's journey and see exactly how this plays out. This is that initial push, getting from 24% down to 20%. It's where the motivation is usually super high, but it's also where that first big challenge always seems to pop up.
Joe kicks things off with a really solid plan. He's aiming for 2,100 calories a day, a good 160 grams of protein, 8,000 steps, and he's hitting the gym 3 times a week. But, and this is a big but, look closely at that last point. He's logging his meals during the week, but when the weekend rolls around, he just kind of estimates. And this little detail, it's a classic mistake, and it's about to catch up with him, big time.
And you know what? At first, it totally works. He makes great progress, dropping 8 pounds in just 6 weeks. His clothes are fitting better, he's feeling great, he's building some serious momentum. And then, bam, nothing. The scale just gets stuck. It won't budge.
What's so frustrating is this crazy pattern that emerges. You see, during the week, he'll see the scale dip down to 190 pounds. He's thrilled. But then every single Monday morning, it jumps right back up to 192, maybe 193, and he starts thinking, my metabolism must be slowing down, or maybe I need to do way more cardio.
But here's the thing. The real issue isn't his metabolism at all. The key insight here is that his plan for the week, it's already working perfectly. The real problem is those untracked weekend habits that are completely undoing all of his hard work. So the solution isn't to be even more strict during the week, it's about fixing the weekends.
So once Joe finally gets a handle on this, he starts pre-planning his weekend meals, he's more diligent about tracking, the scale starts moving down again. But that plateau, it definitely cost him some time. All in all, phase 1 took him 10 weeks.
Okay, now we're heading into phase 2, that big push from 20% down to 16%. Now this is where progress naturally starts to slow down a bit. And it's also where impatience can lead people to make some very common and very big mistakes. So Joe is really starting to feel the pressure of that 6-month deadline. Then he has a work event, he goes over his calories, and the next day, the scale jumps up, and he panics. He feels like he's falling way behind schedule, and he decides he's got to do something drastic to fix it.
And what does he do? He makes a massive cut to his daily calories. He drops them all the way down to just 1,700. In his mind, this is the only way. This is what it's going to take to get back on track and speed things up.
But of course, this super restrictive approach,
backfires. And it backfires fast. His hunger just becomes completely overwhelming, and only 5 days into this new plan, his willpower just completely shatters.
He ends up eating over 3,000 calories above his target in a single day. He said it felt like his impulses just completely took over. This right here is that classic restrict binge cycle that traps so many people.
So what was the real solution, the smart move? Well, it's not a drastic cut. It's a much more sustainable approach, just a slight reduction in calories, let's say down to 1,900, and you pair that with a slight increase in daily movement, like bumping your steps up to 10,000 a day. That creates the deficit you need, but without triggering that crazy, overwhelming hunger.
So because of that work event, the binge that followed, and then the time it took to get back on a sustainable track, Joe basically lost a couple of weeks of progress. So in the end, Phase 2 took him a total of 13 weeks.
And that brings us to Phase 3, the final and honestly, the hardest phase. Getting those last few percentage points of body fat off is always the toughest part. This is where the battle really becomes more mental than it is physical.
So his 40th birthday, that original deadline, it comes and goes. And look, he's the leanest he's been in 15 years, which is amazing. But he's not quite at his goal. So he goes on his birthday vacation, stops tracking everything, and just enjoys himself. But when he gets back, he's gained back 6 pounds. And he finds himself just stuck, kind of in this limbo state where he just can't get his focus back.
At this point, Joe doesn't need another diet trick or some new workout. What he needs is a total shift in perspective. And this is the thought that changes everything for him. He tells himself, you know what? 5 years from now, I won't care if this took 6 months or 9 months. What I will remember is that I finished what I started. And that's when he realizes he will absolutely regret stopping when he's this close to the finish line. That little shift in his thinking was the final piece of the puzzle. Joe gets right back on track, he tightens things up, and he just decides, I'm finishing this. So after all those plateaus and the setbacks and the mental hurdles, what did the grand total, the final timeline, actually look like?
Let's just break it all down one more time. So Phase 1, that took him 10 weeks. Phase 2 was 13 weeks. And that final, mentally draining Phase 3, that took another 16 weeks to get through.
Which means, in total, it took Joe 39 weeks. That's about 9 months, not the 6 months he had planned on. The math wasn't wrong, but life got in the way. Joe isn't a robot. And guess what? None of us are.
So when you really look at his whole journey, you see what the real keys to success are. It was never about being perfect from day one. It was all about patience. It was about consistency. It was about making small, sustainable changes. And most of all, it was about having that mental toughness to find a solution when things got hard, instead of just throwing in the towel.
Look, getting lean is 100% achievable, but the path to get there is not some straight line you can plot on a spreadsheet. It's a journey, right? It's about learning and adapting and just persevering through the tough spots. So the real question isn't how long will it take? The real question is, are you ready for the real journey it takes to get there?